But all right, I do this after every election, by-election and all the rest of it. 5 things that we learnt out of the result last night that we will need to digest both now and into the future. Number 1, the arrogance of Albo. The arrogance of Albanese was on show all the way through. Now, he decided on election night to say the first thing out of his mouth was to deliver on that statement and to therefore deliver on a referendum. He did so before there was any plan or mechanism or place to go. Every little moment of this was staged to make it look like the Prime Minister was making history, that the first entry in his Wikipedia page would be the man who delivered this change. Now remember, those aren't members of the public that were standing there and clapping him on. This was after he made yet another of the small movements in this referendum where the hallways were lined with Labor staffers. That's not members of the public, it's Labor staffers that were told, hey, can you come to the ministerial wing and can you line the corridors to make it look like everyone's on side? Now again, part of the arrogance of Albo, remember, even after this thing started to go south, and that was in about June of this year where it went sub 50%, he refused to change the question. He refused to show the draft legislation. Now, he had an opportunity to split a question about recognition and the voice, so maybe one of those two things could have come up. No. He knew better than everyone else. I will not change. To deal with the where's the detail, he could have produced the piece of legislation that says this is the voice in the fully detailed form. How will it be elected? How will it be paid? What are the limits of its powers? All the rest of it. But no. The vibe was going to win because the vibe was winning when he first started talking about it. Remember the countless media appearances where he just refused to answer the direct questions he was being asked because the arrogance was, I've got the formula. I've got a special sync with the Australian people. If Albo wants it and Toto agrees, he thinks that the Australian people were going to be like Toto and just sit in his lap and agree. Well, guess what? They didn't. And also, when this thing started to become very clear that there was virtually no path to 50%, meaning that even if he could win a couple of states, this thing would be gone, he didn't delay so he could change the question, release the draft legislation, or actually start answering proper questions. He didn't cancel it, he didn't delay it. No. This was the moment we had to have. And while a lot of people are going to talk about who is responsible for the pain of the communities that are most affected or the people who voted yes and didn't get the result they wanted, one name and one name only, Albanese. He was in charge of the process the whole way through. The whole way through. Now, last week, while he was crying in the dirt of Uluru, he literally chose that as the priority on Monday of last week, rather than going to a synagogue after what had happened when it came to Israel. It was the perfect metaphor of his priorities. And yes, that event was there, and he wanted to go there, and he cried, and it was the greatest honour of his life was to be able to put this before the people. Well, of course, his tactics, his play, his belligerence, while he gets to wrap it all in pretending that it was all about conviction, and geez, won't I get to that in a second. He, of course, ended up sending one final message about his priorities. Again, that event was on, it would have happened without him, but he chose to be there instead of course, going to synagogues like he did later in the week. It was more important for him to sit in the red dirt for the images of history, rather than the history of the day and the priorities that he should have been showing. And then there was that speech. If you stuck around to actually watch his speech, now he had an opportunity. He's obviously hurting, right? Why? Because he's lost so much in all of this. And let's imagine in his heart of hearts this was all and he was all in. But where was the opportunity to say, I could have done this better, take a bit of responsibility? But no, instead, we were right. It was all the media's fault. It was all Peter Dutton's fault. When it was the Australian people who changed their mind. And the Prime Minister kept playing it like it was 60-40 going yes, not 60-40 going no, the whole way through. And then a talking point was sent out to the different corners of the media and the political infrastructure in this country, that rather than the belligerence and arrogance of Albo being the reason that we went through this very long process with hundreds of millions of dollars piddled up against the wall, and once the polling became evident that there would be heartbreak as a result of it, we were told that this wasn't because the Prime Minister was arrogant, not because he was belligerent, but because he was a conviction politician. This is just some of the times it was said in the past 24 hours.
thank you for the conviction that we've shown.
You know, he's shown a decency and a courage of conviction.
Yes, Australian people want to see conviction.
I had a duty as a conviction politician. We argued for this change not out of convenience, but from conviction.
Seriously? Seriously? Oh, he's a conviction politician. Now, of course, if he was a conviction politician, and as roundly criticised as he would see, you know what? I'm going to put this to the vote in the Parliament. I'm going to call the Libs on their bluff that they may well back a legislated version of the Voice. Now, he'd be roundly criticised for it because 60% of the country's turned around and said no. But if you're a conviction politician, you'd be willing to bet it all. If you're a conviction politician, you'd be willing to turn around and say, no, this is the central point of my Prime Ministership. I'm all in on this. But instead, he wanted all of the advantage of being all in with none of the consequences. But that, of course, is the way that Albo works, dare I say, the each way of Albo. And he and his mates will have many ways of getting back at the Australian people who voted no, who denied him his place in history. Take your pick. Obviously, in the next week, rather than recognising he could have released the information, he could have answered the questions, he could have delayed, he could have split the question. No, we're just going to change the subject. Oh, this will be the week where he's just wall to wall changing the subject. Expect some sort of delay to question time, be that tomorrow or on Tuesday, because of course we must have all of the sympathy messages. Of course, the first priority of the Parliament when it comes back is to talk about the horrible things that happened in Israel, but when he had the chance to go to a synagogue, no, that had to wait because he was still campaigning in the middle of the country. Now, the media is going to go full Trump on Dutton. I showed you this in the lead up to it, the hate they have for Peter Dutton. They are going to go as hard as they can, and you watch how history will suddenly be twisted, that without bipartisan support, which, by the way, was pulled months before we even knew the wording of the question. Pulled, gone. Then he knew that he was pushing it uphill, but he kept pushing because he thought that the claps and tweets would get him across. He'll punish regional Australia just like he punishes them when it comes to the renewable policy, manufacturing policy. Oh, he's got some fun coming for the bush, where they just vote no and they vote nats, so who cares? But the biggest way he's going to get is revenge on the people who he thinks wronged him, denied him the spot in history that he so richly deserves out of the greatness of his own heart, the misinformation bill. Now remember, the government will hand regulatory powers to somebody to decide what is and isn't misinformation. Now, defamation, very clear, you can't do that on the internet or on television or radio. But if you argue what the government doesn't like and you use a series of data that they don't like, that's misinformation. And there are some moves on to try to apply this code to the broader media, not just social media. But increasingly, as many people interact with broader media via social media, via the internet, they're going to pretend that they're cracking down on crazy things on Facebook. No. What they're really cracking down on is you being able to see on platforms like Facebook, like YouTube, like X, like, dare I even say, TikTok and Instagram, the stuff that government doesn't want you to hear. And remember the shifting sands about what misinformation is. Now, literally, everyone from media organisations of the left all the way through the Human Rights Commission say this is a bad bill, there's a problem here. But he has a path through the Parliament. All of his MPs will back it, which means it goes to the lower house. And you don't think the Greens are going to want to double down and do this as well? Watch that as the revenge play from Albo. Meantime, 5 things we learnt after this referendum. 1, the arrogance of Albo. 2, the media didn't listen. It truly didn't listen, and it didn't reflect an honest conversation and the reality of the debate. Now, the polls, I repeat, around June started to show that this thing was going below 50%. But increasingly, the media found ways of not talking about the no case, they were just talking about the strength of the yes case. They constantly went out of their way to turn appearances like the one from Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price at the National Press Club from being about what she actually said to a conversation about colonisation. Now, of course, the great difference between, say, a Lydia Thorpe and a Jacinta Nampijinpa Price is Lydia Thorpe thinks we only need to talk about one day and one day only, and that is, of course, 1788 or maybe even 1770, unless we talk about day one, then nothing gets fixed. Well, of course, Jacinta is focused where I think 60% of the country ended up landing. What are you going to do tomorrow? But the media, not interested. Remember, we showed you that when they had the choice to cover her speech, the one that now the extreme majority of Australia voted for in every single state. Her worldview was what they agreed with in relation to this referendum. Oh, no. Let's cover the symbolism of a very well-meaning, deeply loving man who decided to walk from Melbourne to Canberra because that was the convenient message the Prime Minister wanted to play. We showed you that. Remember the 2 minutes of news, 1 minute of fluff, 15 seconds of Jacinta, but nothing to do with his speech, just the question of colonisation. Over and over and over again this happened. And then what about the little spurt of aggro that we got from one of those that will now go full Trump on Dutton, the one that will try to, again, pump up things like the misinformation bill, Laura Tingle over there at the ABC. Now, remember, she's effectively a commentator. Now, the ABC is not supposed to have them, but she's there as an analyst, you see. So she's allowed to basically do what I do each and every night, but she does it sort of a different way, doesn't she? Now, she, among other things, talked about the false balance of the coverage, that we had to give 50% to no. No. In this world, where if I think it's right, despite the fact that it's contested, I will just pretend one half of the argument doesn't exist. This is how you get to a scenario where people are surprised by results. Unless you actually tell them what's happening with the polling, well, then one of two things can always happen. Yes or no, Trump or Biden, Clinton or Trump, Brexit or no Brexit, Morrison or Shorten could actually take place. And no matter the fact that you may agree or disagree with whatever those decisions are, they're not a shock if you're actually paying attention to the data leading up to those election days. Now, here's some of the reaction, in part from the media yesterday.
We're about uniting this country and moving forward and fixing the problems that we have in Aboriginal
just going to interrupt
communities.
You there because
I'm not going to sit here and cop lies from people.
Well, we're not going to sit here and take you abusing a national treasure like Marcia Langton, who never said that Australians were racist.
And you must accept
and her words were twisted. I'm going to stop you there, Warren.
People make the decisions.
I think, well, we've just seen who Warren Mundine is.
Yes, that's right.
Do you have anything further to add?
I didn't say that Australians are racist.
For those who perhaps don't understand the lives of Indigenous Australians, who don't understand the inequity, the challenges, to then try and understand this proposal and how that could potentially fix some of these things, it was too much for them to get their head around.
There were lies and there was misinformation through the campaign.
Unbelievable. Right? Now, again, you can have a view, that's fine, and I'm fine when people wear their heart on their sleeve, but we can't cover both sides of the argument. Not at all acceptable, because there is no other side of the argument. Well, guess what? There was, and Australians chose it. And then I've got to say this. The 6 p.m. news tonight, its treatment of this vote, after this forever conversation that we've had, was a disgrace. Because we all know the result that they wanted. You saw it in all of their sort of funereal coverages last night. Channel 7 did lead the news with this story, and I'll get to that being a contrast in a moment. But the reality was they did it for just 4 minutes. That's it. Literally, hot days get longer coverage on the 6 p.m. news than 60% of the country going to the polls and telling us their view on this issue. And Channel 9 didn't even run the story as their lead story tonight. Instead, a protest where, frankly, nothing happened was their lead story tonight, not the national vote on The Voice.
Tonight, thousands of pro-Palestinian supporters take over Hyde Park, police on edge. Fresh plans to evacuate Australians out of Israel amid bloodshed in the mass exodus of Gaza. Australia's worrying new travel advice for Lebanon. The Prime Minister's voice silenced as the referendum is rejected.
Seriously? Come on. A protest where nothing happened. It's not to say all these stories aren't important, but it's pretty obvious what the lead story is tonight. Unbelievable. All right, another example here. Arrogance of Albo. Media didn't listen. The polls were right. Newspolls' final one, once it took undecideds out, was 60-40 in favour of no. So they got it right. But some of the polls played games. Now, remember, for months and months and months, the Essential poll didn't have undecideds in there. They just forced people to a yes-no position. And then once, surprisingly, undecideds were counted, it started to show no was rising. In the Resolve poll, they only ever spoke about the strength of the yes case. They never really emphasised in any of its analysis what was happening with the no vote. Now, the whole thing is this. Again, you can have your view, you can say what's right and you can say what's wrong, but we need to have certain sources that we can hang our conversations off. Don't interpret the poll, just tell me, up, down, undecided, yes, no, undecided. Don't put in the headline, the yes case is this or the yes case, and just literally ignore the one that is now starting to replace what had been the majority position at the start of this thing. Arrogance of Albo. Media didn't listen. Polls were right, but they played some games. What does this thing actually mean about the next election? Well, I'll be very honest with you, not a huge amount, however. It doesn't say nothing about the next election. Now remember, 29 seats around the country, they voted yes. You would imagine these 29 places are going to be the places where the let's blame Dutton, let's blame misinformation, this is where the real heart of the aggro is going to be going into the next election. But 122 seats voted no. Interestingly, of the 20 seats that changed hands in the 2022 election, obviously moving away from the Libs, some from Labor, but where did they go? Well, right down the middle. 10 voted no, 10 voted yes. Now, interesting to note in all of this, let's have a look here at some of these states and their breakdowns, right? Now, Higgins, Wentworth, Kooyong, North Sydney, Goldstein, Brisbane, Griffith, Ryan, McKellar, Curtin, they all voted yes. So Higgins, which probably will end up being a teal seat, voted yes. Wentworth is a teal seat, Kooyong is a teal seat, North Sydney's a teal seat, Goldstein is a teal seat, Brisbane, Griffith, Ryan are green seats, McKellar is a teal seat, but that's only just, Curtin's a teal seat. So again, Lib's unlikely to be able to flip anything there in the next little while, so their chances of getting to 76, pretty damn unlikely. However, remember, the government is only in majority by a couple of seats. So if they lose a couple of seats, guess what may well happen? They go into minority government, and that will be hell for the country. Now, of course, Western Australia, where Labor won a whole bunch of seats, if they even lose 2, maybe 3, that would be enough to put the government back into a minority position. Pearce, Hasluck, Robertson, Fowler, Swan, Reid, Boothby, and remember, even Bennelong, which at one point was looking like it was going to go yes, they all went no. So there is some path there for the Libs to be able to take some anger. Maybe there'll be some residual anger about the Prime Minister going through and putting the country through all of this. If that's going to pay off anywhere, it'll pay off in Western Australia. If they'll be punished in the places where the green bits will get greener, meaning Labor could lose a seat in South East Queensland. Again, the most likely outcome here, in my view, is that scenario of the Labor Party going into minority at the next election. Now, finally, the arrogance of Albo. The media didn't listen. The polls were right, but they played games with the information. What it means for the next election, and finally, for the left, democracy only works when you win. Now, remember some of the insults that came out from that Yes campaign? The insults that they thought when it was still 60-40? Well, of course, this was how they behaved.
What that asinine slogan is saying is if you're a dinosaur, a dickhead, who can't be bothered reading, then vote no.
Every time the no case raises one of their arguments, if you start pulling it apart, you get down to base racism. I'm sorry to say it, but that's where it lands. Or just sheer stupidity.
Drumming up outrage, trying to start a culture war.
It is importing Trump-style politics to Australia.
Yes or no. It's that simple. I wrote yes. My daughter was there. She got it. She's 9. She said, I can't believe anyone would vote no to this.
The no campaign strategy, a deliberate strategy of promoting fear over fact.
This is a sign of just how low the no campaign is willing to go. And I call on Peter Dutton today to condemn this. If he doesn't, then he is complicit in this lie.
When lefties win, it's a revolution for the ages. When they don't get what they want, it's just the start of a national conversation. Watch what happens, because it is going to get wilder from here. I think that many of the yes advocates that were playing polite during this campaign are going to start to associate themselves more with the black sovereign movement. But I think the majority of the country will want to be with Jacinta Price and practical outcomes, practical solutions, and yes, audit of where money goes. And there's a smart-ass Labor Party response to that, which is, well, didn't the Liberal Party, weren't they in charge of this money for the past 10 years? Yep. And guess what? It was misspent. And the 10 years before that, and the 10 years before that, and the 10 years before that, and the 10 years before that.